Hi, Becky.
And welcome back to all the moms, dads, and caregivers.
I'm excited to introduce our guest today, Becky, the third of 4 moms who are sharing their stories.
Should we get right to it?
Yep. So our guest, Yvonne, has been through a lot. We'll start with this.
A DCFS worker came to my home in the middle of the evening and told me that my oldest daughter had to leave the home or they would take all of my children away.
So, DCFS is the Department of Child and Family Services. The city is Chicago. And again, the threat is that if Yvonne's eldest daughter doesn't go live somewhere else, the city will take away all 6 of her children. DCFS visited because social workers at school overheard Yvonne's eldest son talking to his buddies.
He told a story at school one day about, it's 6 children in my home. And yes, there do be fights, okay? But it went a little extreme with his storytelling.
Yvonne loved her son's sense of humor. He was quite the storyteller, but there was nothing funny about the visit from DCFS. Yvonne was soon in the car, taking her daughter to stay with her sister.
And we cried, I screamed, and I cursed. My daughter is, the most precious thing here on the planet Earth to me. My miracle baby. Not everybody understands our relationship, but we do. She helped me through a lot.
Maybe we should just take a moment to let this sink in, Erin. Honestly, Erin, speaking as a mother, just that much of the story is terrifying.
Right, me too. But for you and I, it sounds like a nightmare. For Yvonne, it was, in reality, her biggest fear.
You hear about the stories of, women having their children taken away because they don't have a stable environment. That was always a fear of mine. I had DCFS called on me so many times.
And here she is, reflecting many years later.
What surprised me along the way, honestly, was that my children were not taken away.
So the fear was so real that she was actually surprised in retrospect that it never happened.
Right.
Because the many times that I got called on the carpet for what others call bad parenting, me having to show up to defend myself and take mental abuse from people that were basically did not understand my situation nor did they care to.
So Erin, since this podcast is about trauma, I think it would help our listeners if we try to define Yvonne's trauma.
So, trauma comes in many forms. It can be a single event, like a car crash, as we saw in our first story, or it can be a series of events that has a beginning and an end, like the domestic and the physical and sexual abuse in our second story. But in this case, it was a much longer trauma over so many years.
Like the threats from DCFS?
More than that. In fact, for Yvonne, the fears about losing her children weren't even the worst part.
I'm going to say the toughest one for all of us that sometimes we still face now is homelessness. Not knowing when we got placed in that situation how difficult it was going to be to come out. It happened several times.
Yvonne's kids have vivid memories.
The day I had to put my stuff in storage and move into a shelter, that's the story that they'll still tell. That was the hardest, the absolute hardest.
The practicalities of living in a shelter were hard enough. There was also what it meant to Yvonne.
That my family was broken.
Let's take another pause, Erin.
So, Becky, there's something I think we'd better address.
I'm pretty sure I know what you're thinking.
Some listeners may be a bit stuck right now. They may be thinking, on the one hand, this is so tragic. At the same time, this is a tragedy of Yvonne's own making.
Right. She's a single mom, living in poverty, and she has 6 children.
Here's the thing. Yvonne, she's heard it all before.
I get it. I had too many children. I get it.
She's even heard it from people who are very close to her.
And the day my grandma came down to my house and said to me, "What are you going to do? Just keep having babies." Man, that hurt so bad. It cut so deep.
And she heard it when she asked for help from others in her family.
"Well, you had these babies. You take care of them. It's your responsibility, not mine." So it was a very hard reality.
It was a very tough message for a young adult to hear.
Well, yeah, damn, I did put myself in this situation. But using, my framework of Christianity, aren't we supposed to help each other? Especially family.
So it sounds like Yvonne was confronted with a whole lot of guilt, Erin.
Maybe even overwhelming guilt. And as you and I both know, emotions like shame and guilt can be crippling, making it much harder to move through trauma and much harder to be an effective parent.
So, Erin, I'm flashing back to our first story, the car crash. Imagine how much harder it would be for Tracy if she'd been distracted while driving, and if she was the one who had driven into oncoming traffic.
That's a pretty good analogy, but to hit even closer to the mark, we need to add a bit more. Imagine if the people close to her, her friends and family, reminded her frequently that she was the one who caused the accident, so she was the one that had to clean up the mess.
Right. Maybe a short pause to let that all settle in?
Some of our listeners might even want to pause the podcast, take a few breaths or even a few minutes, and see if you can put yourself in Yvonne's shoes. And instead of focusing on how she got into the situation, ask yourself, how can she move forward?
And how can she be the best possible mom to her 6 children?
So, before we dive back into the story, let's give our listeners just a hint about how it ends.
Great idea. So, the kids are all grown up now. They're in their 20s and 30s, and Yvonne's a grandmother.
And she recently graduated from college, magna cum laude, with a double major.
It's nice to know just that much even, Erin. It's a tough story, but it does get a little better. Maybe I could narrate the next segment of this story?
Sure, that'd be great.
So let's go back in time to where we left off. Yvonne and her family have packed up their stuff, put it in storage, and moved into a shelter. Of course, it wasn't long before Yvonne wanted to get out of the shelter.
Somebody got to take us in. And so that's when I began to really cry out to my family.
But the help did not arrive quickly.
That experience right there, it almost broke me because I said, where's my family at? This should not have been our experience. That was the thought that was in my head. And my children too, because I trained them to look out for family, no matter what they do.
Help from her family did eventually come. There were periods of time that Yvonne was able to live with other family members, but mostly Yvonne and her children had to move around a lot.
I think I've only had my name on maybe 3 leases in my life out of the 10, 15 different places that we've had to live.
Those times when she had a place of her own, they felt different, in a good way.
And we sat down to eat. It started to really sink in that home is not just a roof over your head.
So what are you thinking about, Erin?
I'm thinking about what Yvonne just said, that it's not just a roof over your head, it's also a sense of safety, security, stability, and maybe a sense of normalcy as a family.
And it's hard to feel much of any of that when you're constantly moving from place to place.
And uncertainty about housing, that's just one part of the poverty that Yvonne faced.
We'll say more about that next. So Yvonne rarely had a place that she could truly call home. But there was something more that she struggled with.
Currency, money. There wasn't a lot, there wasn't a lot of it.
Not long ago, Yvonne asked her daughter how she first knew she was poor.
And she said the day they had to eat hash browns and ketchup. Now, when she said that, I laughed, as it was really funny to me because it's an upgrade from what I had. At least you had something hot and it was delicious. One of the things that my grandmother taught me how to do was survive off barely nothing.
So Yvonne had experience with poverty, and survival skills. Still, this is how she describes the experience of raising kids while facing intense scarcity.
It was hellish, okay? Not physically on fire, but mentally on fire. Yeah. Not fully understanding what it took to not only take care of a child, but take care of myself at the same time. You take care of a child, it's baby, baby, baby first. You come second.
At times, the pressure was relentless.
I used to have a cape on, I think, because my children pretty much grew up understanding that mom just made it happen. It got so bad that I think I almost worked myself to death trying to do it. I guess I can say I was angry because at some point, it's like baby, 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 but mama needs a break.
This is so tough because Yvonne is in pure survival mode. There's no time or space for healing or recovery or growth.
Especially since Yvonne is parenting alone, with barely anything at all. It's taking everything she's got just to feed and house her children.
Right. So we can be sure this is going to be a long journey for her family.
Yvonne did the best she could, drawing upon one of the only resources she had, sheer will.
I did not give up on myself, on my children.
Yvonne had to stay strong, even under pressure from DCFS.
And so it was a very difficult space to hold my head down and take that shame and guilt and get beat up with it. And then finally saying enough is enough. And flipping that narrative and saying I did not leave my family. I stayed. I saw everything through, the good, bad, and the ugly. I saw everything through, so please stop beating me.
Sometimes Yvonne's children drew comfort from her strength. Here, Yvonne shares one of her daughter's recollections.
She said I was on the phone arguing with the father of my children, asking him to support us because the children were eating ketchup and hash browns. And she heard me tell him that day that whether he helped me or not, I was going to make it. And I said that? And she said, yes.
In these tough circumstances, Yvonne did her best to meet her children's needs. Here's how she described those needs.
Love, right? In the sense of time, talent, and treasure. Those were the forms of love that they needed. And I could not always give them at the same time. So I had to pick and choose how I showed up for them. But one thing I always attempted to do was show up with my time.
One challenge that Yvonne struggled with is familiar to a lot of parents, finding the right balance between love and discipline.
So I don't want to give the child everything because, this is going to make my life miserable if I start that practice. And there was 6 of them. So there was some discipline, right?
As the kids got older, they began pushing back on the discipline.
They said, Mom, please don't hurt us, though. Because, again, hurt people. So they started making jokes, right, about how I showed up. And now that's how we kind of get through it. It's the jokes. And I finally figured that out with the last one. Because the day I made her cry, because she made me sad when she did something. So when I explained to her how sad it made me feel, she wrote me a letter. And I still have it.
Yvonne is clearly learning and acknowledging that maybe she was too hard on her kids at times. To me, this highlights how important it can be for parents to take care of themselves, to address their own trauma, to manage their own emotions, so they can show up as a parent in the best way they can.
Especially when the emotions are strong. And in Yvonne's case, they're intense. Shame, guilt, and probably anger.
Unfortunately, Yvonne had little free time and few resources for taking care of herself.
Right. So again, this is going to be a long recovery.
So, as we've been saying in other episodes, nobody gets through trauma alone. Yvonne leaned on her sisters.
My sisters were great support for me. fighting through the tears of, sisterhood and then motherhood. And sit and talk about me wanting to run away from that responsibility of motherhood because it was so, it was so tough, when you had to do some of the stuff by yourself or if you didn't have the financial means to do so. It was like, you're not a quitter. So it's my cheerleading team, my sisters, letting me know that what we experienced as children, was not normal. And our mom was going through something too. So how do we now show up to be different for our children?
Yvonne also drew strength from her church.
Early on, I did accept Christ, I think at about 8th grade. So definitely before I started having children, it was in my brain that I was supposed to take care of them and treat them right.
Yvonne sought professional help at times. A therapist had provided important support when she was a teen.
So our professional help actually started when we were teens. All of us did therapy. My stint with therapy came from my attempted suicide at 16. It started something, at least, getting, some of the dark thoughts from my head.
Still, Yvonne did not have complete trust in the healthcare system.
When I saw a psychiatrist, and that psychiatrist wanted me to take medication and told me that the medication would not harm my child. And I was not convinced that that was true. And so I never saw the psychiatrist again, didn't take the medication. And that's when I started leaning into church.
She also worried about privacy.
I was like, nobody should know our business. We just keep it in home. And however it is we get through it is how we get through it. Because of, reactions from, having outsiders know what you're going through.
And even in retrospect, Yvonne has doubts.
Now, looking back, that type of therapy that we were doing, I know we were not ready for it because of the conditions that we were living in.
So even when there were some public resources available, Yvonne didn't trust them.
And that's unfortunate and also quite common in some communities. Sometimes the systems aren't worthy of trust.
So Aaron, it's time to fast forward a couple of decades, from Yvonne, the young mother of 6, to Yvonne, the grandmother. As we said earlier, there are some positive outcomes. The family is still together, and Yvonne has earned a college degree. But the trauma Yvonne experienced still affects her children.
Being nomads really impacted their lives because once they started experiencing it in their adult life, I saw the hopelessness. I saw in their faces what I experienced when it was me.
So she does her best to support her children, starting with encouragement.
At least you do not have as many children as I did to navigate child homelessness. So, it's okay. You'll be all right.
And these days, she provides a place to call home.
You can always come lay your head at my house. I don't care where you've been or what you did. You can always come back home.
The pandemic provided Yvonne the opportunity to bring her family closer together.
And then when COVID hit, it was a blessing, honestly, for me, because it gave me a moment of pause to begin the healing process of apologizing to my children for my behaviors. And they were all in my house at one point, during the pandemic. And, there were some explosive moments, I tell you. But we're processing through the apology and what it looks like in practice.
It also gave Yvonne a chance to keep working on being a better mom. Sometimes that means celebrating.
She had a birthday on Saturday. We celebrated. I cooked her a 5-star dinner, catfish, salmon with mashed potatoes, asparagus, salad, and a cake.
Other times it means the daily practice of love.
In hindsight, my children did not fully get the love that was due to them because of my experiences personally. I'm now practicing being a mom a different way so they know it's safe to come back home. I will be okay. There won't be too much noise, too much fuss and fight because we all grown now. And it's okay if you wash your dishes and clean up behind yourself.
And she tries to help her children understand all that they've been through.
And that's what I'm now giving my children the opportunity to do, is move through this beauty of what created them and how they came to be. So we share wisdom. And the first thing I share with them is to take care of themselves.
There's a lot of beauty and wisdom here, Becky.
Yep. For one thing, I'm seeing a mom focusing on the psychological foundations of what we've been talking about: safety and love.
Right. And when you have few resources, safety and love may be all you can do. You may not have the perfect house and the perfect life, but safety and love go a long, long way.
Part of the love I'm hearing is forgiveness, or the healing process of apologies, as Yvonne puts it.
Yes. Also, I love the emphasis on taking care of yourself. That can be hard to do when you have so little and you're just trying to survive. Still, you can do a better job helping others, especially your kids, when you are healthy.
Also notice that Yvonne isn't trying to erase the traumatic parts of the family's history. In fact, she calls it the beauty of what created them.
Yeah, I love that. Yvonne has accepted that trauma changes a person. Recovery is about understanding that your trauma history is part of who you are, part of your identity.
That's right. As it turns out, Yvonne has a lot more wisdom and beauty to share. Much of it comes from recent experiences, like going to college and getting more involved in her community. Going to college helped her understand her own experience more deeply.
So it's a very personal piece for me to begin to look at my life a different way. There's beauty in it, reliving and honoring a childhood and understanding how deep poverty runs and what it does to you. And, how you act out of character sometimes when you're trying to survive. I'm okay with the outcome because now I understand the trauma and I own it now. I held myself accountable for my actions. I changed how I want to be.
Yvonne was also able to give herself more credit for what she went through.
It was traumatic, right, in the sense of doing it by yourself. But then it was also empowering because I did do a lot of things by myself.
Through her studies, Yvonne also saw more clearly how her trauma story extended from generation to generation.
It explained a lot of the traumas that I had been throughout my life. It explained my family's trauma. It taught me to forgive my mom. Because if my children can tell me that they forgive me, certainly I can turn that grace and mercy onto my mother and do the same thing.
And she began to think more critically about how race had played a role.
It's very hard and challenging to do, to understand the narratives of racial trauma and move through it. How do I breathe under the white gaze? What Black studies showed me was that I was not a number. I'm not just a sex. I'm not just a gender. I'm a human being. And I had to connect back to my humanity because, for lack of a better word, I was ready to explode.
She even felt inspired to get involved in trying to bring healing to her community.
I had a professor that inspired me. She said, "We need you right now." And so I was like, well, what does that mean? So looking at the roots of Black studies, looking through the lens of psychology, what does our community need to heal? Being able to do this as a community advocate, first learning how to do it for myself, now training my children how to do it, is how the work started for me moving through trauma.
And finally, she deepened her understanding of love and shared it with others in her life.
It's a practice of love. And every time I tell people that, they say love is an emotion. And I gently correct them and say, love is a noun, a verb, and an adjective. And you must do all three at the same time. You have to embody it. It's a way of being that set you free no matter what else is going on around you. Understanding what love is was where the growth happened, and it showed me the strength that I had within. I had to learn what it meant to truly show love as a way of being, as a practice of saying, no matter how you treat me, I'm still going to stand up. One of the principles about love is, do you love yourself? And it took a lot of introspection work to see that I did not previously love myself and why I suffered so much. And so now the difference now of the love that I give myself looks like what I give everyone else.
So much wisdom there, Becky.
So the tough thing is that the trauma, poverty, and episodes of homelessness, these struggles continue to some degree for Yvonne's kids.
It's a long trauma story and a long trauma recovery in nearly impossible circumstances, but we can see giant strides forward.
Yeah, we can see a whole lot of healthy post-traumatic growth.
Back soon for our next and final Amazing Mom.
This podcast has been brought to you by the Dartmouth Trauma Interventions Research Center, hosted by Erin Barnett and Becky Parton. Special thanks to all of our guests. Editing by Kay Jankowski, Erin Barnett, and Becky Parton. Script development, audio production, and music composition by Chris Trimble and Treehouse Audio Productions. Please see the show notes for more information.